Hello and welcome to the Indie Bandits podcast and live stream if you're joining us live. This is our ongoing series on marketing indie games. I'm Joe, and as always, I'm joined by our resident content marketer with a decade of experience, Jimmy. How are you, Jim?
I'm all right. Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, just thought I'd mix up the intro there for you.
Yeah.
Just just change it up. I'm feeling fruity today because we are mixing things up a little bit. If you didn't know, I'm Joe and I'm a translator and copywriter with a background in marketing, which is why we feel at least remotely qualified to tell you about marketing indie games. This is the fifth session in our Indie Bandits Marketing Clinic. We've spoken about all sorts, including our State of Independent Games report, which is available on the website now if you want to check that out. In the near future, there'll be analyses and accompanying articles to go with that. But we've also done a few of these where we spoke about sales funnels, what you need to start marketing your game, and content marketing and content schedules was our last one. And today we're going to be talking about budgets. And
Yeah. Fun.
I know. I mean, look, we're not here for the big draw clickbaity content. We're here for useful content that indie devs can actually use. So, it won't have Hollywood pizzazz and all that kind of crack on, but it is very important, and I'm fairly certain that everyone will get something out of it. Now, for me, in my line of work, I don't really touch the financial side. So for the majority of this episode, I'm passing the baton over to Jimmy, who does know a thing or two about this kind of crack on. And we'll leave it with him. His voice is good, right? You're fully healed,
I
tonsil
think
free,
so, yeah.
Jimmy. Well, we'll find out. I mean, if your voice goes halfway through this, it'll make for an excellent podcast. Yeah.
Yeah,
Without
you'll think
further
you'll
ado,
think
here's Jimmy.
right. So yeah, we're gonna get into the most exciting topic there is, budgets. As Joe said, probably not the most entertaining of issue, or what would you call it, episode? Was this an episode we're
I've been
doing?
calling them episodes.
Episodes, yeah. But it is very important, and I hope that some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today will help you if you've got absolutely no idea where to start when it comes to making a marketing budget. Um, it's going to be more of an overview than anything too in depth. Obviously, we'd be here for hours if we were going to go right into exactly how you could draw up a marketing budget. And it's a bit of give a get out of jail free statement to make, but every business, every game, every different person will have a different marketing budget and different goals for their marketing budget as well. So it's impossible to do a one size fits all, but we're going to try and give some generic tips and advice that will hopefully help. You can use this as a starting point for your research into marketing budgets. There's probably a million and one fantastic resources out there that you can go and find. There's any number of articles, and maybe even would be very useful. I didn't find any in my research, but if there was someone who'd actually developed their own indie game who'd already gone through this process and had a budget and created a marketing budget, maybe there's an article out there that you can find that is particularly relevant. As I say, I didn't really find one myself,
Well,
but there might be one out.
materials are thin on the ground for this, which is kind of
Mm,
why we do it. I mean, we didn't this many moons ago. This wasn't the initial idea for Indie Bandits. This isn't why we started Indie Bandits, but we sort of have sort of fallen into this role because of just the sheer lack of resources and the lack of guidance out there. And as most devs I speak to mention, the skills to make an indie game are not the same skills needed to market it. So even when they go out for looking for this kind of stuff, there's not often stuff that covers both
mm.
in that respect. So there's no there's no great materials for starting off, which is I think why this broad overview approach that we'll take with this one should be really useful for devs.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe in future we might be able to wangle someone who's gone through this and actually produced an indie game, get their advice on what they did specific to indie game marketing budgets. very useful to get that. But anyway, hopefully this will be of use for you to get started anyway. So we'll jump into the first point. I think we've mentioned this in every single episode so far, but research before doing the thing you're doing is absolutely key. So don't just start opening, don't open a Google Sheet or an Excel spreadsheet and start putting numbers in there before you've actually done a bit of the research, a bit of the planning beforehand, because a lot of what you do in this first stage is actually going to help you when it comes to putting numbers into the spreadsheet. So the first few things I would do is, number one, I would start with, what are your sales goals? How many, I guess in this instance, it would be how many copies of your game are you hoping to sell in a given time period? So you could do it monthly and yearly. And this will help you. This will give you a point at which you can work back from. Sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but actually, if you start with the end goal, makes it a lot easier to find where you're going to start from. So figure out what your sales goals are when it comes to your indie game, and then start to work back from that. So you'll have your final number. It'd be very, very useful. This is only for those those indie devs. Sorry, I'm going to say businesses by accident a lot
of course I have this.
because this is just going to happen all the time. It'd be very useful if you are post revenue, if you already have a conversion rate, or several conversion rates from which you can work from at this stage. But if you don't have that, if you're pre-revenue, then it might be worth looking up some industry standard conversion rates for the various platforms that you might use to market your indie game on. Because if you have your final number and then you have a conversion rate you can work to, could be different for every platform that you use, just bear that in mind. Then you will probably end up with a number of how many people you need to reach based on that conversion rate to hit your sales goals. So if I say let's give a numbers example. Let's say we're going to try and sell 100 copies of our game next month, and we have an audience of, across all social media platforms, we're really going to try and simplify this. We have an audience of 1,000 people, and your conversion rate so far, 10 of those people have purchased your game. So that is a 1% conversion rate.
I'm noting all this down. If I'm keeping track of the maths, Jimmy, so don't you worry, because I am horrendous at maths. So
yeah,
I've got this.
Well, if I get any of that wrong, I'm sure the advice will stand, even if the math is slightly wrong. But if you have an audience of about 1,000 people and you promote your game on social media, and 10 of those people have purchased your game, then you can that's a 1% conversion rate. So working off that, if you want to sell 100 games per month, you're going to need to reach 10 times that audience.
10,000 people. I can do that sum. 10 times 1,000.
Yeah.
It's 10,000.
And that's based on that conversion rate. Obviously, conversion rates fluctuate as you do different marketing initiatives and find different platforms that work better and messaging that works better. But if you work off a basic conversion rate in the beginning, you're going to have to reach that number of people. So then from that, you can look at the different platforms you're going to use, and you can find out what the cost or the approximate cost is going to be to reach that number of people every single month with your marketing message. So let's say you're going to use Twitter, and it's going to cost you, I have no idea, by the way, I don't advertise on Twitter, but let's say $100 a month to reach 10,000 people on Twitter who are targeted to your your niche, the audience you're going for. Then that your marketing budget on Twitter is going to be $100 a month. That's going to reach 10,000 people. That should hopefully generate 100 game sales per month. So you can figure all of that out by basing it on your end goal, your end sales goals. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So working your way back, and obviously costs will change on different platforms. And you'll have to figure out what is actually a profitable month for you, and whether or not the cost of reaching that number of people for your conversion rate is going to be profitable as well. So there's a lot to work out. but essentially that's what you want to do. How many games do you want to sell? How much is it going to cost to reach a certain number of people so that a certain percentage of those people convert to buying your game?
What I might add there, because when you mentioned Twitter ads, there's no hard and fast rule for Twitter reach and cost, because it depends on a lot of things like targeting and the actual segments you pick to
Yeah.
target, and obviously broader segments. If you don't define any kind of audience, then depending on your target, because you can do cost per click, cost per engagement, cost per follower, and a lot of a number of other metrics, but basically you know your mileage may vary with Twitter advertising, because it depends on who you're
Right.
targeting, and Twitter, like a lot of the other platforms, bids for these. So the pay will depend on who you're trying to reach and how you're trying to reach them, even through Twitter ads. So
Yeah.
certain segments will cost different amounts.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Again, part of the research
But
though.
it is, yeah. That's the stuff you're going to have to do. Obviously, I can't do that now. Again, we'd be here for hours if we were going to put an example on screen and go through it. But if you go on in all of these things, you can, Facebook, Twitter, I don't know what Instagram's like, LinkedIn are probably not applicable, but a lot of these platforms, you can go through the advertising process without actually paying for any advertising. So you can go through and build the ad and find the audience and figure out how much it's actually going to cost without actually being obligated to pay for that advertising
Yeah,
until you've worked it all out. So you can spend a bit of time doing that and just crunch the numbers basically. And understand a lot of different aspects of it as well. Like, what is your another bit of research that you can find out initially is what are you selling your game for and what is your profit margin? That is going to help you figure out your budget as well. If your profit margin is much higher, which typically, if I'm thinking correctly about an indie game, probably will be because you produce the game one time and then sell multiple copies of the same thing. So your profit margin, as it's a digital product in most cases, will be probably reasonably high. Which, when we get to industry standard numbers for how much money you should put towards your marketing, will probably skew a little bit. There's no hard and fast rule there, but there are, percentages that people tend to think are ballpark figures you should look at spending when it comes to your marketing. Um, but the higher your profit margin, the higher the percentage of your revenue that you could possibly put towards your marketing. The lower your profit margin, see, the lower you'll have to play with at the end of the month or the year whenever you decide to build your marketing. There are obviously some other avenues you can explore as well, non-digital avenues, but those are probably going to be out of reach for most indie devs on smaller budgets. Those are things like sponsoring major events, outdoor advertising, that type of thing, possibly radio advertising, those sorts of. But in this episode, I guess we'll probably just try and stick to the digital formats because it's probably going to be most applicable to most of the devs that are going to watch this video.
yeah.
So
I think it'll mainly be social and probably search engine, and then any other kind of paid advertising would probably be either through media, digital media, obviously not print media. Though there's no
yeah,
reason not to, but I think you'll get on to working out how well the budget's working for you in a bit. But yeah, no print media, but digital media, and payment for kinds of things like spots and articles, and any other kind of promotional material as well. But
and
again,
I would say especially we'll get to it in a little bit later actually, but particular PPC, pay per click advertising, search engine, whether that's search engine or social media, is a really good place for people to start if they're just doing this for the first time, because you can very easily track your results, target specific people. It's a very user friendly way of beginning to market your game, and obviously that's just the advertising aspect of marketing. You push messages out on social media for free, and that's considered marketing as well. But in this particular episode, we are going to be discussing paid for strategies.
those platforms are also really good for scaling, because they take all budgets. There's a very low barrier to entry for like AdWords and even social media advertising. You can pay little as you want or as much as you want, and the kind of way these platforms work is the more you pay, the more they'll push your message.
Yeah, and you can get in front of exactly the right people as well by being extremely focused with your targeting. So I'll just do some industry standard numbers here. If your post revenue, again, this is probably going to apply to a smaller number of people who watch this video, but if your post revenue, typically the percentage of revenue that you'll put towards your marketing budget is around 5 to 15%. Certainly not a hard and fast rule, but that is typically what you tend to see for a lot of businesses. So if you can't do anything else, your post revenue, look at how much you're earning per month, take about 5 to 15% of that, and that could be your marketing budget if you have absolutely no time to do any of this stuff. Although I highly recommend doing the other stuff, I would never recommend just putting a random percentage of your money towards something without the rest of the planning.
Yeah.
But if you are stuck and you want a place to start, somewhere just to, I don't know, internally visualize where you might want to begin, consider between 5 and 15% of your revenue to be put towards marketing. And obviously, if your budget isn't massive, which I imagine for a lot of indie devs it might not be, you want to prioritize your marketing methods by return on investment if your budget's restrictive. So don't do a scattergun approach. Don't look at 10 different ways of marketing your game on 10 different channels. Pick the ones that are giving you the best return on investment and just go into them and stick with them until the budget allows for further experimentation. There's not really much else to talk about in terms of post revenue that for now anyway. Obviously you want to do that initial planning. But if we talk about pre-revenue now, which might be applicable to a lot of devs who are watching this year and currently just building your game, then what you want to try and do here is do some forecasting. Could be, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a numbers person really, could be the most boring part of running any business, but it is very important. You could, if you do your forecasting, then you could use a percentage of that forecasting to work out what your budget may or may not be. So when you start planning your marketing plan and you're coming up with your budget, then you can refer to your forecasting if you don't actually have any cash to be working from at this stage. You can still go through all of the process of everything we talked about before and just use your forecasting to figure out what that marketing budget might be and what you're able to start marketing. And obviously, this would be slightly different if you're pre-revenue, but you are funded in some way, whether that's self-funded and you've already decided to put aside a chunk of money towards marketing, then obviously do the exercises and do the research that we mentioned before. Or you might be funded by somebody else, in which case there'll also be possibly some money there for marketing. So being pre-revenue doesn't necessarily mean there's no money in the pot. Marketing, it just and essentially doesn't actually make any difference. The best thing to do is to go through the process of doing all that planning, all that research, figuring out the numbers, what conversion rates are, what percentage of X to earn X you need to get, and just go through that whole process.
It might be worthwhile, especially if it's your first game, and I believe, though we haven't actually checked this, so I might be pulling this is a very anecdotal evidence, but I believe a lot of the community is working on their first game, and it's yet to release. So I imagine there's a lot of pre-revenue cases out there.
Yeah.
But also, as with research, there's no reason you can't ask other devs who are post revenue for ballpark figures as part of your research. Obviously, this it may not become true, but it's better than no information whatsoever and going in blind than just pulling figures out your arse and expecting it to work. If you have if you find a dev with a similar anything like a similar following or a similar community size, try and find the dev and the product that's most like yours. That'll probably give you the best information on these kinds of conversion rates to expect. But if you don't have anything, ask around, because from what I've seen in the community, that that these aren't sneaky like Cyril Sneer-esque business people. These are, friendly indie devs who are probably happy to talk about this. So if you find people in the community, ask them. Obviously, ask them if you can ask them first. I think you always say, "Can I ask?" Just a bit of manners, but I think most people would be
Yeah.
quite happy to discuss, their conversion rates and their experience. I don't think any indie dev, you know, wishes harm to their fellow devs. They want them to do as well as possible. So do ask and do, and make that part of your research if you can.
Yeah. Yeah. Lean on any help you can get. Uh, es- Especially as you say, if you're doing this for the first time, it can be a little bit overwhelming to be looking at doing this type of thing. It makes it all feel very real as well at this point,
Yeah.
which can also be another thing that can be a little bit, oof, actually doing the business side of things.
Yeah. That's when
Um,
things get serious.
yeah. Um, if you are pre-revenue as well, another bit of advice I could give is and this ties in nicely with what Joe just said about asking other devs, what's worked for them and how they figured out their marketing budget, is pick one method marketing your game and master that before you move on to another. The last thing you want to do with limited budget and having never done this before is try and do 4 or 5 different ways of marketing, paid marketing for your game. It's going to be very hard to keep track of all of that, work out the attribution for everything, the conversion rates, etc. And you might also end up wasting most of your money on something that doesn't work. So the best thing to do is pick one method, do your research to find out what that might be, and then master that and get fantastic results from that before you decide to do something else. Once you've done that and you're bringing in a bit of extra money, then you can expand and look at other different channels as well and see what else might work. You've got to be a lot cannier and wiser with your spend. There's a lot less room for experimentation at this point. That comes later on once,
You've
hopefully
got
your game
revenue.
takes off. Yeah, and you're doing really well. Then you can start to look at other ways to game with budget. You know, it's difficult to say what budgets typically are for this. You'll know what your budget is if you've got one. Uh, if you don't, as I said, do the forecasting, do the exercise, and you'll find out sort of what your budget might have to be. And you can either go raise that money or you can self fund that if you think it's, you want to push this and commercialize your game more effectively. It's almost impossible to pull a number out here, say what budgets typically are for pre-revenue indie devs. I
Yeah.
couldn't even imagine there's even a a number out there. So
No. Well,
everyone will be different, but it doesn't mean that you can't get great results from whatever your budget is.
it'll scale to what your budget is. Basically,
Yeah,
you can still get good results, but the results are highly dependent on what you're able to put in. So obviously, while part of your research, you'll be looking at how much you expect to get back from it. So obviously, smaller spends will get smaller returns, but you know they'll be a percentage of what you put in. Likely, if you've done the sums, if you've done your maths right, what you'll be getting out of your spend should be related to your spend. So as that scales up, then so should the amount you're getting out of it.
yeah. You should always be looking that, whatever for every dollar you put in your marketing spend, you should be getting, certain number of dollars out of that. You know, if you're not getting that, then you want to try and look at other marketing methods or marketing channels. You don't want your every dollar spent earns you 80 cents. That's not working. Every dollar spent nets you $1. I guess that's not terrible, but it's also not really working very well. You want to be getting, $2, $3, $4 for every dollar you spend. So figure out, and you really need to do, I cannot stress this enough, take the time to work out what those channels might be and be careful with the budget that you have, especially if it's a smaller. And
Which
that
it
leads
likely
us
will be.
on to, yes, yeah, it will. Yeah. There's no shame in that at all. It's just the way it is. Uh, and there's no reason to suggest that just because you have less money, you couldn't outperform someone else who has more money budget. If you're being cleverer with your budget, you might get a better return. So the actual size of the budget isn't always indicative of what you're going to get in return. Just remember that as well. Um, that leads us on to into returns, tracking your return on investment. So this is obviously incredibly important. You don't ever want to be putting money into something and not knowing whether or not that thing worked. Uh, and while 100% attribution is difficult, and by that I mean you are never going to know, you're never going to be able to track every single sale of your game back to a specific thing that you did to make that person buy the game. That's impossible. But you should still be able to see which methods paid marketing are working well and which of them aren't. And that means tracking your return on investment. Now, with certain things, it's easier than with others. So, with pay per click advertising, with social media advertising, all that sort of stuff, it's relatively easy to track your return on investment. You can track things like clicks and conversion rates by using specific URLs. And also, these platforms often show you as well. So they'll give you an analytics feedback on how well your advertising's gone. So you will, to a certain extent, with those paid methods, and they're certainly the ones I would probably recommend looking at first. They're the ones that are going to be easier to track your return on investment from. But there are other ways of obviously tracking other marketing methods as well. Just make sure, however it is you're going to track your marketing spend, you put that in place and you keep looking at it frequently. I don't mean you need to look at it every 5 minutes, but you probably want to look at it every day. Make sure that the dollars you're putting into your marketing are returning as dollars in your pocket as well. The next step here would be to A/B test as much as you can. If you don't know what A/B testing is, it is creating 2 or more versions of a particular thing that you're doing. So you might create 2 or 3 versions of a landing page, might create 2 or 3 versions of a pay-per-click ad that's trying to do the same thing. And the reason we do that is you can run all of those simultaneously, and choose how often each of the versions are presented to somebody. And then over time, you will see which of those versions is performing best with your audience. And that allows you to refine your message, become more effective over time. Now, with A/B testing, you do have to wait a while to actually have a certain number of people go through the process before you can actually see which ones are working best. But it is a really good idea to take the extra time in the beginning to set up A/B testing with whatever marketing method you do, if it allows for A/B, so that you can understand which methods and which particular details within each of those methods work best and earn you the most money in return for your marketing spend.
I might add that with even if a platform doesn't offer like native A/B testing, there's still no reason you can't almost ad hoc an A/B test and run two things and compare them. Because in essence, that's what A/B testing is: just checking which of two things, or more, as you said, but the A/B indicates two things. Which of the two things is working most effectively,
Mhm.
and if you can't do that natively in the channel you're marketing within, but I believe almost all digital platforms allow for some form of A/B testing anyway. But if for any reason you can't, there's no reason you can't run two similar types of messages and analyze the data yourself. Obviously, that's slightly more work, and you want to avoid that when you can if it is offered natively. But if not, almost as part of your research, there's no reason you can't go back over and you should go back over everything you do. Like you said, not every 5 minutes, you don't need to check it, but at points where you'll have enough data to make, informed decisions, go back and check over how everything's performing. And if you have multiple things performing, then you can compare and see which is working. And obviously, the one that's working better is the one you want to, you know, put more budget into or prioritize.
Yeah. Yeah. And as your budget grows as well, you can look into more channels um, where perhaps the goal isn't direct sales of your game as well. You might want to put it into channels where what you're doing is building that awareness or that familiarity around your game, which, familiarity is the thing that makes people think a product is superior to others. If you see
Yeah.
something all over the place, you just begin to think that's the best version of that thing. So there's, something to be said for paying for awareness, not just sales, although that leads obviously indirectly to sales. Um, and doing things like sponsoring certain events or initiatives, and doing a bit of CSR, or corporate social responsibility. Maybe there's a particular initiative that you're very passionate about, that in future you might be able to put some marketing dollars behind to support that. That also might then raise awareness for your game, and generate a bit more positive association amongst your fans and community as well. So it's not always marketing budget purely to make someone click a link to buy a game. Sometimes we want to do other things to augment or supplement that marketing activity as well. But I'm not going to go too much into that in this episode, because that's for much bigger budgets, much further down the line. And you could probably do an entire episode on that yourself. But what we want to hammer home in this point is always track your marketing efforts, no matter which stage you're at, whether you're pre-revenue, post-revenue, and you've sold a million versions of your game. You want to track where your the effectiveness of your marketing efforts. But obviously, as we've talked about before, we might be getting this completely wrong, Joe. But our assumption is that most of the people that watch this are going to be pre-revenue, and maybe looking for more budget-friendly methods of marketing their game.
Absolutely.
And there's probably three, maybe four of those that I can think of right now. First one being Google search, or whatever search engine you're using, I guess. Although Google's by far and away
Shout
the
out to all
biggest.
the Bing fans out there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe not. Um,
Yeah,
and obviously social pay per click. So both of those are PPC, pay per click advertising. The benefits of that, they're very easy to track. They're very easy to set up. You can set your own budget. You can set a budget limit as well, so it's never just going to run away with itself, and you suddenly open up your dashboard and find out that you've accidentally spent $1,000 when your budget was $100. You can set the limits, and you can get direct messages to an extremely targeted audience of people who are going to be in a particular buying mode at that particular time. So you can target certain phrases, um, and audiences with this, and it's obviously the more you use it, the better you'll get with it. But even for a beginner, spending just a couple of hours, maybe watching a couple of YouTube videos on how to set this up, and then having a go yourself, you can get up to speed with it pretty quickly. And obviously, it's entirely based on your budget. There's no minimum spend with these things. So it satisfies every budget. It's probably the easiest one to use, the easiest one to track. So I would recommend, if you don't know where to start and you want to try, obviously after you've done all your research, you figured out that Google or social pay-per-click advertising is what you want to do, then I would definitely recommend that.
I might put a
Um,
little asterisk there that there
mhm.
is technically a minimum spend on certain social platforms. I think Facebook and Instagram have a lower boundary, but we are talking like $1 or €1 a day to run an ad.
Right.
So
Okay.
so
So
you know
essentially nothing.
so yeah, it's less than a cup of coffee, which is the universal unit
Mhm.
for
Yeah.
giving money away to something. That's how it works. That's why Ko-fi and Patreon and stuff like that, support us if you want. Just little little plug in there. But yeah, the
Yeah.
the the amounts for these social media platforms, even the minimums, are incredibly low. And like you said, you can set limits. So if you are wanting to like run an ad with €1 or $1 or your currency of choice, and you can only afford it once, you can run it, even just as an experiment. Like you said, you can toy around with these before you spend anything, and the platforms are quite open with like who you'll reach and what you can expect, because this is, this is how they make their money. So, by they have nothing to gain by swindling you. You'll get
No.
pretty much the exposure and the clicks that you ask for. How well you use these and how you make sure that they're the right clicks, that's an important part of it when you're using it and setting it up. This is where you might want to watch a video on making sure you're picking the right audience, because it's very cheap to send out a message to anyone, and you'll get tons of clicks, and none of them will be people who would ever be interested in your game, and you could get literal hundreds of thousands of clicks that would never convert, that would have a horrible conversion rate because you didn't target anyone. But if you play around with it and pick the right audiences, you can experiment with this very cheaply as well as you learn, putting almost literal pennies into this whilst you work out how it all works. And I think even indie devs with zero budget might have a few pennies to spend just to try these out,
Just to get familiar with them, learn how to track, learn how to set it up, learn how to A/B test, learn how to set a budget, figure out how granular you can get with targeting your audience and which people are the best people to target. What you might think are the best audience to target might not actually be the best audience to target. So there's a lot of experimentation to be done there. Certainly don't get disheartened if your first $10 on Google or Twitter advertising doesn't net you anything. It's all part of a learning process, and there is an element of you will have to figure this out before it starts to really work for you. So just understand that. I would say emails, budget friendly. If you have been building an email list, which if you go back to one of our previous episodes, we heartily recommend you do, then you can email your email list. That is a completely free option. So that doesn't even require budget. That is a budget friendly method of marketing your game. Build an email list, market to that email list. Now, where it comes into this episode is you could use some of your marketing budget to build an email list. So there may be one or two different things you can do to, instead of marketing your game pre-revenue, you decide you're going to market your email list or the reasons why someone should sign up to your email list. You don't just have to do all that for free on social media. You can boost your call to action with the call to action being sign up to our email list, find out more about our game. So even if you think I don't have a game to sell right now, doesn't mean you can't be putting a marketing budget to use right now so that when you do have a game to sell, you can email a much bigger list of people consistently and as frequently as you want with your own messaging at absolutely no cost at that point. So consider that. Consider email almost like another product of yours in this sense.
Well, I add that you want the release to be built on the very best foundation, and we've said this before, and
Yeah.
your marketing has to start at day one. If you're starting any project, admittedly not all indie dev projects start with a commercial vision. Sometimes people might be playing around just making a game with no commercial ambitions, and then realize partway through, hey, I might be onto something here. This is something that could sell. But the second that you have any commercial ambitions for your game, you need to start the whole process for marketing, which will go back to the previous episodes that we were talking about, looking at sales funnels, looking at what you need to start marketing, working out how you're going to get the actual marketing content out and with what regularity, and, as we're talking about today, budgeting for that. And email's an essential part of it as well. I'm a huge fan of the mailing list. I think it's a non-negotiable part of it. It is like you said, it's a very budget-friendly way to access people who have shown interest in your product. These are people who have willingly given up their email address to you so that they can be contacted about your product. Like if that isn't a huge amount of interest shown already, like
Yeah.
I think in most countries in the world, mailing lists require a very clear and definite opt-in,
Mhm.
and always need to be given the option to opt out in every
Yep.
email and communication you send out to them. So this is, these are valuable people. These are people in your list who have clearly shown that interest in the product, whether it exists yet or not, and want to be contacted about it. So, you know, one, don't lose them. Two, try and gather them. And as you said, you can do that through, paid advertising, boosting a call to action to your mailing list. There's a lot of, you know, ways that it mightn't be sales now, but members of your mailing list are very valuable when you don't have the product ready to be sold.
I would argue as well, if we're talking about, lower marketing budget, um, indie devs here or pre-revenue, building an email list would be arguably the number one thing I would be looking to do, because I know that when it comes to launching my game, I'm not going to have the biggest marketing budget to do this. So what can I do now? How can I spend some dollars now? How can I run a giveaway now? How can I build my email list so that when I am ready to promote my game, I've got a really robust list of people that are warmed up because they've already expressed an interest in my game that I can market my game to immediately, so I can get some sales, I can generate some revenue, and then I can put that revenue to work in a marketing budget to reach people outside of the circle of influence that I've built up with my email list.
They're also likely to be your early adopters. These are the first people
Yeah.
who will, or champions, or whatever jargony term you want to use. But these are the people who, like I said, have shown a lot of interest, and when it comes to the game being released, are likely to buy it. And these are these are players who are more likely to sing the praises of the game. They're invested in it before it was even a product. These are some of the people who are most likely to, give you the positive reviews, tell their friends, get the ball rolling, and at launch, that's, worth its weight in gold.
Yeah.
Similarly, I
Um,
might just add, because I think some
mhm.
devs, and we do like to bang on about a good mailing list. I want to address that, because I know there'll be some people thinking that potentially, well, I've got them to wishlist my game, and I would say it's not quite the same. Wishlist's great. Get people on the wish list, because that's a direct way into their inbox via Steam or Itch, or whatever platform they're wishlisting or adding your game on. But remember, these communications will come from Steam. One of many communications they'll get from Steam. It's not the same. It's nice of Steam to send automated emails out to people who've wishlisted your game to tell them when it's on sale, or when it's been released, or anything like that. But that's not the same impact in an inbox as someone who's signed up for your mailing list and is getting an email directly from you with your name on it, with your subject line in it.
Oh yeah, no, definitely not.
I would say it was scales of magnitude different. I think a good mailing list sign up with someone who's engaged, and you can tell their engagement. We mentioned this last time. You can tell their engagement from how they've interacted with previous emailers, and you can target them directly in all the powerful segmentation we talked about last time. That is
Yeah.
way, way, way more valuable than a wish list. Obviously, if you can only have one of them, then you might have to settle it. But if you only get a wish list and not the email sign up, then you're gonna have to settle for the wish list. But a wish list is not at all more powerful than a mailing list sign up. At least not my
No.
opinion. I'd love someone to come around and prove me wrong, but I honestly think the value of the mailing list and the mailing list sign up and what you can do with it is worth way more than, automated messages from Steam.
Well, even just from the point of, once say a game launches and someone's wishlisted it, if they don't buy it, and then time trudges on and they just sort of forget about it, they're not going to keep getting messages about it, I assume, or they're going to ignore them. But if someone is in your email list and doesn't buy straight away, you still talk to that person on a regular basis. You're still keeping that lead warm, as it were. And you can then maybe get a conversion out of them further down the line. So it just allows for you to have a more personal relationship with people who might purchase your game. It allows you to um, figure out which of those people, are very interested in your game, which ones are less interested in your game. And it also means that no matter what happens, you still own that audience, which we've talked about in the previous email related episode. Um, the
Yeah, I
final
just love
bit,
banging on about mailing lists. Sorry.
yeah, the final
Go on.
budget friendly method is, and I mean this from a perspective of, uh, paid for, is a well built and well planned website. So, your website could arguably be your biggest salesperson in the early stages of your business of your game once you've actually started marketing it. So it might be worth spending a little bit of marketing budget to make sure your website isn't just a really poor website, that it's actually looks really professional, it shows off your game in exactly the right light, and it makes people excited about your game when they land on your website. Gives them a reason to sign up to that email list, or gives them a reason, in a perfect world, to convert and purchase your game. So don't think of a website as just a must have, I'll just put anything together. It might actually be worth looking at how you might be able to, and by no means am I saying spend a fortune on this. There's some very affordable options out there. Actually put some marketing spend behind your website, because it will act as your storefront, your shop front, um, your main source of communication with people who don't already know about you in the early stages, and arguably throughout the lifetime of that game anyway. So consider maybe putting some money behind a well built and well planned out website.
Well, we mentioned this in the funnel episode that the website acts as various, at various stages throughout your funnel. It's and it forms a really firm foundation to showing off your product and allowing you to control the messaging, and
Yeah,
from drawing people in, making that good impression, generating awareness. Excellent, but it also allows, and we talked about this as well when we talk about content and scheduling content. It also allows for you to put out regular messaging, build awareness, and also make that final push for the sale at the very bottom of the funnel. It can you can get all that messaging on the website, especially with certain it doesn't have to be super complicated, but I think there's something to be said for it being more than just a sort of digital business card. There's a
yeah,
lot
no,
of
it's a
powerful stuff you
powerful
can do
tool,
with it.
definitely. And we've all been, anecdotally, we've all been on crappy websites and really good websites,
Yeah.
and we know how much of a difference it is to have that experience on a really good website, and how much the positive association your game will get by having a polished website compared to a crappy website. People who land on a poorly optimized rubbish website, they're just going to assume the game's not going to be very good. It's the way the mind works. They land on a really polished website, they immediately start thinking, oh, the guys behind this have really put some effort into this. I assume they're also going to put a lot of effort into their game. Maybe watch. So don't just go for zero spend or dirt cheap spend on a website. Maybe look at how you can make that the absolute best website for your game you can possibly make it.
Well, also it can house it can house and I'm back on emails again, but it can house your
Ah,
email sign up. You can
yeah,
integrate
exactly.
a
Yeah,
lot of stuff. You can integrate the email sign up, be it a pop up, a bar, a button, a page, however you want to get that sign up. You can do the same with wish lists as well. There's no reason you can integrate that in there. If the game's not available to purchase, then that you can integrate the wish list button onto there. But you can also just embed and integrate stuff like the actual buying of the game.
yeah,
And
yeah.
there's you know like you
Well,
said,
it acts as a salesperson, doesn't it?
yeah, you remember a really good a good website, and the whole like user experience behind a good website, like you said, acts as that salesperson.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as, like, the landing page having like the really cool trailer that if you have the budget for a really cool trailer that you've commissioned or made yourself, or or fronted with all the like the best things to show off your game, that can turn from someone who just had a passing interest in it, lands on your page, go, oh, this is way cooler than the tweet, which you could also be promoting, the tweet or the Facebook post or whatever. There's no reason part of your spend can't go on those calls to action, like you said, before you've released the game. You can be boosting things like email signups, like website visits, all these kind of things. If you know your website's excellent and have the information to back that up, that your website's effective in converting people into like email signups or awareness, or people are constantly talking about how great the website is, then it pays to boost posts that are directing people to it. Like you said,
Yeah.
100% attribution's not possible, but if you're getting tons of like
No.
excellent feedback about your website, and people are like, oh, the website was really cool, and I immediately wishlist, and and if you have that information, you can't 100% say that your website's doing all the selling or wish listing or email signups. But if you have an inkling that it's going well, then get people there.
Yeah, and talking about attribution there with a polished website, you might never hear from anybody ever that they loved your website. It might be almost impossible to figure out that someone had that experience on your website and then therefore, looked around it, clicked on a bunch of pages, then after a few visits was like, you know what, actually this game looks really good. I'm going to sign up to their newsletter. It might be impossible to find that out, but we, from our own life experience, and I'm sure yours as well, when you have been on, when you're looking for a product to buy, whatever that might be, and you land on a website that is a very highly polished website when you're doing your research, it immediately, subconsciously makes you think far more positively about that brand or that business than a really bad version of that. So it can be something that boosts their appetite for what it is you're producing without ever making, without them ever really being able to attribute that reason. Even if you ask them, they might never actually go back and go, you know what, it was the website. So it's hard to attribute that, but we all know a very well built, well planned website that shows off everything that's great about your game is going to perform far better than a really crappy version of it. So it might be worth investing in it.
Well, we also know, I might just add that a lot of these things happen subconsciously. Until you
Yeah,
actively think about it, you don't know this kind of like gut feeling you have. And a good website will give you the right impression of the game. And like we mentioned in the funnels episode, like these are all touch points. These are all moments where someone interacts with your product, and the more times this happens, the more likely they are to buy your game. So even if even if no one's, and why would they unless you've asked them directly, randomly come out and say your website's really awesome, I've really loved the navigation bar, like, unless asked specifically, or if you're
yeah,
doing some like, directly looking for feedback, no one's going to say that. But you can still infer some of this, and like you said, you can't fully attribute it. But with some decent analytics, you can always look at how people behave on the website. You can't line up the person who went into every page and spent ages on the website with a particular sale, unless there one visitor from Fiji, and then one person from Fiji said, "This is the best
yeah.
game anyone in Fiji's ever played." Big shout out to Fiji. It was my go-to small island nation that mightn't be getting loads of hits on your website. But unless you have something like that, then you can only infer. But if your website is analytically speaking doing quite well, you can see that
Yeah.
and then infer from it. You can't always, without clever tracking or the right source URLs, etc., you can never fully determine whether it was that pushed them over the finish line to buy the game. But you can see the value in it if people are spending a lot of time on it and checking out all the content you've put on it. If people are going on your website and like watching, your trailer a lot, or looking at all your screenshots and stuff like that, you can see the website starting to work, because these are all instances of people who are interested enough to, watch the trailer or look at multiple screenshots. You can gauge interest by their interaction on the site.
Yeah, for sure. It's all part of the package. It all supplements and augments and supports each other part of it. All right, so we'll come at the sort of the final end of it here. Other things that you can consider when you're putting your marketing budget together. So just a few points of consideration here. Profit margin, as I mentioned before, the higher your profit margin is, so figure that out, the higher the percentage of revenue you can put into your marketing if you want to do that. Lower profit margins will usually end up with lower marketing budgets, and higher profit margins, higher marketing budgets. We also mentioned earlier, it might take you a while to get your marketing completely right, and it might never be like, completely right. That's kind of how marketing works. It's a constant evolution of what works for your product. But just understand that it's completely fine and it's totally expected. Marketers with 20 years of experience don't get it right straight away either. Just make sure you're going to be very careful with your budget if you have a small budget and you need that to maximize the return on investment. Just do extra research, take extra time to do it, and be extra cautious before you put the majority of your budget towards a particular thing.
I might just add here that I think we might have found the first thing that overlaps between indie game marketing and indie game development, that it's an iterative process and you won't get it right immediately. The two are very parallel. You kind of, in both cases, unless this is, your 10th game that you're going to ship and you're a bit of a vet. But even then, people who have made a lot of games and have a good portfolio of games can still get decisions wrong. But I bet you they're way better on that 10th game than they are on that first game. And marketing's the same. It's just a constant sort of informed adventure into the unknown, I would say, that you iterate on, and you can't ever be fully guaranteed of anything that you're going to do. All you can do is take that step forward with all the careful planning and research and preparation, so that you're essentially taking the smallest risk possible and allowing, in this case, your budget to work as effectively as possible.
Yeah, and the great thing about this is those steps into the unknown, you can track how they went. Yeah. You can retrace your steps. You can track your return on investment, and just then do the stuff that works over and over again. So you can try do something, then A/B test it. Oh, the other one worked. Okay, let's do that. Okay, great. Let's A/B test that. Okay, the third version of it worked even better than the second version. So you can constantly iterate what you're doing and evolve it, so that it becomes more and more and more effective the longer you run it and the more you test it. So yeah, you're not going to get it right straight away. Might take a little bit of time to get it to become really effective, but there are lots of ways to ensure that you're not missing anything as you make those steps, those early steps. Your marketing plan, to further this point, should be considered an ongoing project. Don't create your marketing plan and then that's your marketing plan forever. That's not how it works. That might be your marketing plan for the first 6 months after launch. Then you might have to redo your marketing plan then, because it's a different ballgame now. Maybe you've done a marketing plan and after 12 months, you start to see that actually your efforts aren't proving to be as effective anymore. Well, now it's time to look at it and maybe start preparing another marketing plan. Maybe industry forces you to do that. Maybe, wild future, Steam gets shut down and disappears. Okay, how do we now market for another platform? How do we send people somewhere else to buy our game? Maybe the Twitter algorithm changes and your marketing isn't as effective anymore. Not that your messages aren't effective anymore, but perhaps the algorithm doesn't show them in the way you want it to anymore. So you have to then change your marketing to fit the platform's way of producing the best messages. So make sure your marketing plan is considered an ongoing project, something that should evolve over time, should consistently be looked at, maybe every quarter to begin with, to make sure, or maybe every month to begin with, but certainly every quarter, Make sure that whatever it is you're doing is the most effective way of spending your marketing. And my final point would be if you, for some reason, you absolutely cannot do anything that we've mentioned today, you have no time to do it, you don't even want to begin to do the research to do this, you're just absolutely not interested in it, but you know you need to do it, then if you have the budget, it is worth its weight in gold to hire somebody who knows exactly what they're doing here to do this for you. Because you need to produce a marketing budget if you're going to spend money on marketing. If you absolutely don't want to do it, you have no inclination to do this whatsoever, you hate the idea of even spending a minute on this, then find somebody who can do it for you, give them some money and let them come up with the marketing budget for you. Then at least they've done it. You've got a professional document that shows you exactly where you need to spend your money and sorts of platforms you need to test, how you need to move forward and earn the most money from your marketing spend, and then you can apply that. You know, they don't have to become an employee, but you can have someone put that whole thing together so you've got a really solid start when it comes to actually spending your marketing budget, and it stops you putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. That'd be my final tip. You don't want to do it, get somebody else to do it.
What I might add here, and something that we got in the actual report itself, is that a lot of the community weren't working with publishers, and some of them weren't working with publishers because they didn't want to. Some of them weren't working with publishers because they just didn't have the opportunity or the product. But there was also a lot of mistrust of publishers or any kind of professional, because I think there was this idea that the second any part of your project is, outsourced or somebody else does it for you, then you're no longer an indie dev. Like, this is I guess the uh, fundamentalist edge of the indie dev spectrum, that unless you do everything yourself and toil through the entire production process and do all of it on your own with literal zero outside help, then you're not an indie dev. Which, ignoring sparking up a debate about what constitutes an indie dev, all I'd say is that, be it
Look,
publishers or marketers or whatever, you don't have to give up every aspect of your game to get some marketing done for it. Like you said, you could hire someone on a one-off basis to go, look, do you know how to put together a budget? Do you know what works? Have you done this kind of thing before? Are you a professional in this? Could you put together something that would just tell me what to do and then leave me to do it? And you could hire someone one-off. Or, again, going back to publishers, there are publishers who don't necessarily fully publish your game, that will, offer all the services that an all-encompassing publisher would offer, but as independent services. There are publishers that you know won't do the whole thing for you and will be happy with just offering up, maybe putting together a budget for you, or putting together marketing plans, or helping you in certain aspects of the marketing. You don't have to fully outsource everything, but you also don't have to do everything yourself. There's a lot of options out there. And in terms of budget, if there are also cases, but again, be careful with this and read the fine print in any kind of contracts that you do sign. There are options where you don't have to pay for it, but you will give up usually some kind of stake in your game if you can't afford it. If you have the budget and want to pay for someone to do it, then that's fine. If you don't have the budget, then there is free help out there, but in these cases, you will be expected to give up some kind of future revenue from the game. So if you do decide to go down that route, I would just read the fine print very carefully. Most of the publishers and what I'd call indie publishers that I've spoken to are very friendly and are very, they're trying to shatter that kind of preconception people have of publishers by not being as predatory. But that doesn't mean they don't exist out there, and you shouldn't. Just be wary of anything you're signing up to.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if someone's of the opinion that if you don't do everything yourself, you're not an indie dev, then they're not going to ever go down that route. So,
No.
yeah, that's a discussion I'm sure that will be ongoing forever. The final aspect of this is obviously there's some useful tools you can use when it comes to putting together marketing budget. Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel is going to be a good friend of yours for a while when you start pulling together a marketing budget. So it's worthwhile getting used to how those bits of software work, those programs. And another one as well, if you do go down the PPC route, Capterra, quite a big company, they have a PPC bid calculator. If you just type that in, Capterra, CAPTERRA, PPC bid calculator, then that helps you figure out what your bid is going to have to be for certain audiences. It might not be, completely accurate, but it'll give you. I guess it's not going to. The platforms themselves will tell you what the bid is going to be if you're going to use something like a Facebook or a Twitter. But if you're unsure about how bidding works, I guess I should have started with, this is a good place to start to just play around. I think it only references Capterra's audience, but it allows you to play with a bid calculator and how that works, and then how much money you need to spend to earn a certain amount. You can put like the product sale amount into it, and it can, figure all that stuff out for you. So if you're completely unsure about where to start when it comes to the bidding process with PPC, then that's a really good resource just to become familiar with it. So when you then go to a Twitter or a Facebook or whichever platform you decide to use, or Google, then you'll know what they're talking about and you'll have some idea of how that all works. It won't be completely, completely alien to you. And just, I think as well, we should end with even though it's right at the end, the TLDR roundup of this whole episode. So number one, start with your business goals, start with your sales goals and work backwards from that. 2, invest in the channels and tactics that map or work very, that help you achieve those goals. Number 3, measure your progress throughout. Constantly be aware of what does and doesn't work, but don't try and aim for perfect attribution because it is impossible to achieve. So don't worry about it. You can't attribute every single sale back to a certain source. It won't happen. And those would be my 3, I guess, roundup tips. Start with the sales goals, invest in the channels that work, keep it to a small number of channels to begin with. If you're pre-revenue, you've got a small budget, I would argue possibly even just one channel, and make sure you're constantly measuring your progress.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Jimmy. I think we'll call it a day there, and hopefully, if you're like me, then you've learned an awful lot about budgets and how you can apply these strategies to your indie game. If you're joining us live on Twitch, then thank you very much. If you're listening back via podcast, then obviously, if you're not subscribed already, then we'd love you to give us a little subscribe and leave us a review if you found it useful. We don't tell you how many stars or anything like that to give us. That's entirely up to you, but the more the merrier. And if you're watching this back on YouTube, then you can comment, or subscribe, or all of the above. They're all great options. We also we do this out of the kindness of our hearts, but if you do appreciate what we do and would like to send some help our way, you can support us on Patreon, and there are some nice perks for independent game developers on there that you can benefit from by sending a small amount of money our way each month. Or if you just want to send us a one-off contribution, buy us some coffee or more likely beer, then you can go to ko-fi.com/Indie Bandits and give us a little bit of moolah over there.
Mhm.
And I think we'll just thank everyone for listening and or watching. And we will catch them the next time we do one of these. Or play some games.
Yeah. Yeah. Catch you on the next one.
We'll see you later. Big wave. Big bye-bye wave. Ciao, guys.
Bye-bye.